Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of Remembrance of the Daleks, a story that sees the Doctor and Ace return to it all began in the midst of a Dalek civil war. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more content. The Doctor and Ace travelled to Shoreditch, London in 1963 to collect an ancient Gallifreyan device known as the Hand of Omega that his first incarnation left behind. However, two factions of Daleks, the Imperials and the Renegades, have also arrived to claim the same prize, albeit for sinister purposes. Remembrance of the Daleks was the first story of Sylvester McCoy's second season as the Seventh Doctor, as well as being the season that marked the 25th anniversary of the show. McCoy's debut season, Season 24, introduced us to a Doctor full of physical comedy that mirrored McCoy's earlier performing career, with him utilising his umbrella as a prop in many of the earlier stories. Season 24 had been regarded as one of the weakest in the classic series, which was in part due to issues regarding John Nathan Turner having to find a new script editor in a short space of time, which he found in Andrew Cartmel, finding writers and trying to establish a persona for the Seventh Doctor all at the same time. With Season 25, however, Cartmel began implementing some of his long-term ideas that eventually would evolve into the Cartmel Master Plan and introduced a darker, manipulative persona to the Seventh Doctor, coupled with more layered ideas and arcing narratives. A lot of these traits are present in Remembrance of the Daleks. The TARDIS lands near Coal Hill High School, and the Doctor's attention is immediately drawn to a van with a sophisticated aerial on its roof, which he inspects, and comes across Professor Rachel Jensen, who is part of a task force investigating possible extraterrestrial activity. Along with Ace, they are taken to Totters Lane scrapyard, where they meet the head of the task force, Group Captain Gilmore, who is investigating the strange death of one of his soldiers. The Doctor quickly deduces that it is a Renegade Dalek, which is in hiding, which he assists in destroying. Along with Ace, he returns to Coal Hill High School explaining to his companion who the Daleks are, and that he has anticipated their arrival as they are trekking down the Hand of Omega. He believes that the Daleks are using the school as a base of operations, which is confirmed when he finds a transmat in the cellar. However, this turns out to be another faction of Daleks, the Imperials. It later transpires that the Doctor had left the Hand of Omega behind when he originally left Earth during his first incarnation, in the events leading up to the very first story, An Unearthly Child, in 1963. He goes to a funeral home where it is situated and picks it up in order to stage a funeral and burying it at a grave. Reuniting with Ace, he reveals that the Hand of Omega is a tool used by its namesake Omega to turn stars into supernovas, which the Time Lords used to fuel their time travelling in the early days, and he even implies that he was present when this happened. He had anticipated the Daleks' desire to locate the device in order to improve their own time travelling technology, and informs Ace that he actually wants them to have it. However, he hadn't anticipated two factions of Daleks after the Hand of Omega, as well as the task force involvement, and is trying to ensure that the right faction of Daleks gets the Hand of Omega without any more innocent lives being lost. Eventually, the Imperial Daleks defeat the Renegade Daleks and return to their mothership, orbiting the Earth. The Doctor establishes a video contact with the Dalek Emperor, who turns out to be Davros. He antagonises Davros, which enrages the Daleks' creator, and decides to use the Hand of Omega straight away to turn the sun of the Daleks' home planet, Skaro, into an immense source of power. However, it turns out that the Doctor had pre-programmed the Hand of Omega to send the sun supernova and swallow up Skaro, before returning to the mothership and destroying it, before finally returning to Gallifrey. As mentioned before, Season 25, and in particular Remembrance of the Daleks, brought about the darker and manipulative traits of the Seventh Doctor. Here he doesn't stumble accidentally across the Daleks' plan, but rather arriving, having anticipated their presence, and using it as an opportunity to defeat his opponents once again in style. However, he wasn't anticipating two factions of Daleks and the task force, which makes his plan more complicated. This is remonstrated in a scene in the cafe, where he talks with one of the employees about the knock-on effects of decision-making by using the distribution and use of sugar as an example, implying that the actions he originally planned to undertake may have to change to maintain the desired outcome and protecting innocent lives. In essence, the Doctor is playing chess with what he had originally planned against one faction of Daleks, but turns into a three-way game with the presence of the two factions. The darker elements of the Seventh Doctor will be more apparent in later stories, and he still displays his jolly physical humorous aspects in this story. As season 25 progressed, those aspects will be replaced by the darker ideas, but the method of coming into a story pre-anticipating what is going to happen would come up again, in particular with stories like Silver Nemesis, Ghostlight, and The Curse of Fenric, with having no qualms in the latter two of involving Ace as a pawn in his plan of good overcoming evil. This was Ace's second adventure, having joined the Doctor in the final story of season 24, Dragonfire. A 16-year-old from Perivale in West London, she found herself thrown into the far future via a time storm, where she ended up being a waitress on Iceworld. Fearless, adventurous, and brave, she has a rebellious streak in her, and ultimately became one of the most developed companions of the classic series. Upon arriving in 1963 London, she is carrying a ghetto blaster, which gets attention from a mysterious schoolgirl who shows up throughout the story. She is seemingly unaware of the potential time anachronisms a ghetto blaster could bring to the time period, and is seemingly uninterested in the Doctor's curiosity in the man. She decides to go to the local cafe where she comes across Mike, who later turns out to be a sergeant in Gilmore's task force. Upon venturing into the scrapyard with the Doctor, it is her that supplies the Nitro-9 explosives that she initially said she didn't have, and that is used to destroy the Dalek. She later rescues the Doctor from an Imperial Dalek at the high school when the headmaster locks him in the cellar. Over the course of the story, Ace continues to build a closer relationship with Mike and stays at his mother's guest house along with Rachel Jansen and her assistant Alison. She seems scorned when the Doctor wants her to stay at the guest house while he works with Gilmore and the task force in tackling the Daleks, but leaves her a present after feeding her baseball bat to the Hand of Omega, making it more potent, almost in anticipation that she won't stay out of trouble for too long. Having grown bored at the guest house, she ventures back to the high school to collect her ghetto blaster. However, the Imperial Daleks have started increasing in numbers at the school and track Ace down. Ace, though, more than stands her ground by taking out two Daleks with a strengthened baseball bat, but later has to be rescued by the task force when she is cornered by the Daleks. Her bond with Mike continues when he suggests that they go out on a date at the end of the events. This bond is severed though when he accidentally shows his deception by mentioning the Hand of Omega, which he gained knowledge of with his secret association with Ratcliffe, and is to hide his deception. He lies by saying Ace told him. At the conclusion of the story, she goes to track down Mike after he escapes custody, following Gilmore ordering his arrest, and finds him at the guest house where he takes her hostage. Her capture is short-lived though when the schoolgirl arrives, who is under the control of the Renegade Daleks, and has come to collect their time controller which Mike had stolen as a bargaining tool. The schoolgirl kills him before attempting to kill Ace, but resorts to being her normal schoolgirl self when her link with the Supreme Dalek is broken. At the end of the story, the Doctor and Ace attend Mike's funeral, but stop short of entering the church when Ace asks the Doctor if they have done good, to which he responds, "Time will tell." It always does, before they embark on their next adventure. Ace has one of the most developed characters out of all the companions in the classic series, and over time you learn of her fearless and rebellious nature, as well as her dislike for her mother and clowns, as well as seeing her mature from a girl into a young woman. This is hinted at in her debut story Dragonfire, but really develops in Remembrance of the Daleks. She breaks the mould in the way companions are developed, even in her relationship with the Doctor, in that she is continually loyal to him, even if rebellious in the way that she lies about having Nitro 9 in her possession, and ignoring the consequences of her blatantly showing a piece of 1980s technology with the Ghetto Blaster in a time period 20 years before its manufacture. Her relationship with the Doctor would be further tested and put under strain as the series progressed as part of the Cartmel master plan, as the Time Lord had no choice but to start using her as a pawn against his adversaries. Additionally, in Remembrance of the Daleks, Ace demonstrates a lot of characteristics of a teenager by quickly forming a close relationship with Mike, with hints of it blossoming into something more. Had Mike not shown his true colours late on in the story, then it would have been a suitable setup for a companion departing, although thankfully this never happened, as Sophie Aldred was just getting started in the character's potential. In my opinion, Ace is one of the best companions of the classic series due to her development and the Doctor's guardian-like relationship over her, and although she was the last companion of the classic series, her persona would act as an influence for some of the female companions when the series returned 16 years after her last appearance, in particular the likes of Rose Tyler and Amy Pond. By the time Remembrance of the Daleks had arrived, the Doctor's biggest adversaries, the Daleks, had long been cemented into the folklore of the show. During the 1960s, it could be argued that they were as popular as the Doctor himself, which resulted in him appearing in multiple stories year after year, bringing about Dalek mania, which ended during the Patrick Troughton era. There was a second wave of Dalek mania in the 1970s, and that ended with Genesis of the Daleks, when their creator Davros was introduced. From then on, their appearances became more sporadic, as they seemingly lost some of their edge with them being almost relegated as servants of Davros. Having said that, from Genesis of the Daleks onwards, a structure to their backstory, as well as their politics and culture, was developed with the inclusion of their creator, and over time his inclusion started to bring about a civil war, with factions of Daleks being faithful to their creator, ultimately called the Imperials, whilst the original factions, loyal to the Supreme Dalek, became known as Renegade Daleks, with a hatred towards all things non-Dalek equal to the factions' hatred of each other due to them not recognising each other as Dalek. This brings us to Remembrance of the Daleks, where for the first time the two opposing factions have equal screen time and their attentions diverted to each other rather than other species who are here regarded merely as obstacles and distractions from their goal of obtaining the Hand of Omega. We are firstly presented with the Renegade Daleks, which stick to their traditional grey and black colour combination, with the Supreme Dalek being black and silver. For the most part, they are using humans to carry out their tasks, in particular a team of builders merchants, led by Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe is also head of a group known as the Association, who appear to have fascist ideologies when Ratcliffe explains that he believes that the UK took the wrong side during the Second World War, and the country needs to show a strong government modelled on the way the Nazis ruled over Germany. The Renegade Daleks view his beliefs in running parallel to their own, and therefore Radcliffe is more than willing in assisting them in tracking down the Hand of Omega, although he is tricked into believing he is working with them, rather than unknowingly being enslaved, a typical Dalek trick. Radcliffe has a contact in the task force through his association firm, which later transpires to be Mike, which brings closer to the events, in particular the removal of a Dalek that the Doctor destroyed, and the eventual location of the Hand of Omega. Ratcliffe takes his orders from a hidden figure which initially is designed to appear to look like Davros, with the voice even being a likeness to their creator. Ratcliffe and his men exhume the Hand of Omega from the grave where the Doctor had it buried and bring it back to the merchant's yard. From there it transpires that the hidden figure is the mysterious schoolgirl who had been overwatching the events. She then activates the time controller, which allows Renegade Daleks to travel via a time corridor as they prepare to battle and defend the Hand of Omega from the Imperial Daleks before leaving Earth. When the Doctor finds their hideout at the merchant's yard, he reveals that the little girl was part of a Dalek battle computer that relied on a young human connected to the interface to exploit their imagination and ability to act out of logic. He then tampers with their time controller to stop any more Renegade Daleks coming through via the time corridor and stranding the Renegade Daleks who have already made the journey on Earth. The Imperial Daleks eventually defeat the Renegade Daleks and take the Hand of Omega, with the exception of the Supreme Dalek, who takes refuge. At the conclusion of the story, the Doctor confronts the Supreme Dalek and tells him that he is the last one and they have been defeated and the home world has been destroyed, forcing the Supreme Dalek to self-destruct. In the meantime, the schoolgirl that had killed Ratcliffe and Mike in an attempt to regain possession of the time controller becomes free once the Supreme Dalek self-destructs, implying that it had a psychic link with her. The Imperial Daleks are portrayed in a white and gold colour scheme, having made their debut 3 years earlier in Revelation of the Daleks. Like the Renegade Daleks, they are operating from a base. In this case, where they arrive on Earth in small numbers, they are using the cellar at the Coal Hill High School, where they house a transmat connected to their mothership orbiting the Earth. Also like the Renegade Daleks, they employ the services of a human, in this case the headmaster of the school, with the main difference being he is their sole associate, unlike the Renegades who use Ratcliffe and the Association, who cooperate willingly, whilst the headmaster is seemingly controlled by the Daleks via a microchip behind his ear, a method the Daleks have used before. The headmaster's main job is the repair and preservation of the transmat, and to track down the Hand of Omega, which he does whilst following Mike. Once the location of the Hand of Omega has been discovered, the Imperial Daleks remotely kill the headmaster, having already started to send Daleks via the transmat and starting battling the Renegades. The Imperial Daleks also have some technological advantages over their Renegade adversaries, with the first obvious one being the ability to hover, and in particular navigate stairs. This has been a long-term joke regarding the Daleks and their inability to previously navigating stairs, stifling their threat. However, this is mainly down to a lack of budget and technology at the time, and was implied in such stories as the Dalek invasion of Earth, the Chase, the Evil of the Daleks, and the Planet of the Daleks, that this was always possible, and in Revelation of the Daleks both Davros and the Dalek are seen levitating. Remembrance of the Daleks directly acknowledges this, in particular with the memorable ending of Episode 1, when a Dalek hovers up the cellar stairs approaching the Doctor. The Renegade Daleks might have these capabilities, but the Imperial Daleks are the only ones who carry out the ability and use it to navigate the floors of the school. Another advantage is that the Imperials have a special weapons Dalek, which they use to eventually defeat the Renegade Daleks, allowing them to head back in their battle cruiser to the mothership with the Hand of Omega. This is seemingly the outcome the Doctor had planned, and originally revealed to Ace that handing the Hand of Omega to them would have been suspicious, and by the Imperial Daleks taking the Hand of Omega, it provided the opportunity for the device to not only destroy Skaro and its son, but the Imperial Daleks' mothership. With the Daleks still carrying some of their traits they had become accustomed with, for better or for worse, over the course of the classic series, there are some nice differing touches here in Remembrance of the Daleks. Firstly is Davros' absence, bar a cameo appearance at the end, which removes the stigma of them acting as his servants which had hung over them since Genesis of the Daleks. The addressing of certain flaws, such as them hovering, also brings back some of the threat that they had during the William Hartnell years. Additionally, the battle between two factions of Daleks fighting each other, rather than an invasion or something along those lines, is a refreshing change. However, their bid for universal domination still remains. In what could possibly be in keeping with the 25th anniversary of Doctor Who, there are plenty of actors and actresses appearing in Remembrance of the Daleks who appeared in the show before, and while it isn't unusual for actors to appear more than once, the amount of actors reused here is. On top of the usual Dalek operators and voice artists, you have John Leeson, who is better known as the voice of K9, providing additional Dalek voices. Michael Sheard, who plays the headmaster, was making his 6th appearance over a 22-year period. Peter Halliday, who plays the blind vicar, was also making his 6th appearance over a 20-year period, whilst Pamela Salem, who plays Professor Rachel Jensen, had previously appeared in The Face of Evil and The Robots of Death 10 years earlier. Remembrance of the Daleks was the debut story from writer An Unearthly, who at 24 years old at the time was the first writer of the classic series, born after the show was first broadcasted. John Nathan Turner was known for his preference of introducing new writers to Doctor Who, with An Unearthly being the fourth different new writer to the Sylvester McCoy era. But what is unique here is that Nathan Turner was willing to entrust a debut writer with a Dalek story. However, what it allows is that Aronovich writes from a perspective of a new generation of writers, and someone who had grown up watching the show from childhood. The first thing you notice is the pace of Aronovich's script and a large absence of padding. The script does away with any scenes in the TARDIS or it even materialising, and after the opening 10 minutes of the show, the audience have already been introduced to a large portion of the guest characters and a Dalek attack. Aronovich also does away with the traditional episode 1 ending of a Dalek story with their first reveal, even though the audience is aware that it's a Dalek story through the title. This gives the audience more respect and allows opportunity for a more climactic cliffhanger, in this case the episode 1 ending, which is reserved for the Imperial Dalek hovering up the stairs with the Doctor trapped with it in the cellar, and for the first time in a long time you are left with a more suspenseful episode 1 ending for a Dalek story. Aronovich also acknowledges the depreciation and menace and threat of the Daleks with the inclusion of Davros, and harks back to the earlier Dalek stories where they are the main threat, and in this case Davros, although still the leader of the Imperial Daleks, is reduced to that cameo appearance. The scripts and credits even go a long way to remove Davros from the main bulk of the story by having him encased in his own special Dalek casing, going off the title of Emperor, and even having actor Terry Malloy's name anagrammed into a pseudonym of that of Roy Tromley. Despite cutting out traditional Dalek story devices and unnecessary dialogue and padding, Aronovich still purposely overwrote the script and originally included elements of London being under the threat of a nuclear attack, which was understandably cut in the end. Remembrance of the Daleks also contained several themes as part of the narrative, which are also relatable to the ideologies of the Daleks. Racism is the most obvious theme, which plays in with the Daleks' hatred of all species not Dalek, which in turn came from creator Terry Nation's influence of the Nazi movement and fascism. This comes full circle with the Renegades finding a common objective with Ratcliffe and the Association, and them being in support of Nazi ideologies. This also extends to a scene when Ace is staying at the guest house and is shocked when she comes across a sign in the window saying "No Coloureds," which acts as a reminder of the racism that existed in the 1960s and is juxtaposed against Ace, having grown up in a more diverse community in the 1980s. Another influence of the narrative of Remembrance of the Daleks was the Cold War, which was at its height during the 1960s and still fresh in the 1980s, as well as the Second World War, which was still a fresh memory in the 1960s UK, with it being referenced by some of the characters. Having already mentioned the removal of London being under nuclear attack, you still have the notion of people with different political ideologies such as Ratcliffe and the Association, as well as the whole notion of Mike being a double agent. Given Remembrance of the Daleks was part of Season 25, which was also the 25th anniversary of Doctor Who, it seemed only fitting that Aronovich included plenty of self-referencing to the show's past, and in particular, the origins. The most obvious inclusion is the locations used in the story. Firstly, you have Coal Hill High School, where two of the original companions of the show, Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, worked as teachers, and Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, masqueraded as a student there. They even recreate a scene from the first story when Ace picks up the supposed same book on the French Revolution that Susan left behind. I.M. Foreman's scrapyard on Totter's Lane, where we witness the first confrontation with the Dalek, was also the location of where the Doctor had the TARDIS in the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, and where Ian and Barbara followed Susan to when they grew suspicious of her. Aronovich cleverly writes these into the narrative rather than having them included for the sake of it, and there are even subtle nods to the first Doctor's incarnation, when the blind vicar carrying out the Doctor's staged funeral for the Hand of Omega notices a change in the Doctor's voice, as well as the worker at the funeral parlour phoning his boss and telling him he was expecting an older gentleman with silvery hair. Another subtle nod to the show's past is the inclusion of the task force led by Group Captain Gilmore. The task force itself is seemingly based on UNIT, and although Gilmore has an RAF background, he is clearly modelled on the Brigadier in appearance and mannerisms. Rachel Jensen and her attachment to the task force is also a nod to how Liz Shaw found herself recruited to UNIT. And although Mike later turns out to be a traitor, you could argue that his persona is a sort of hybrid between Sergeant Benton and Captain Yates. Remembrance of the Daleks was directed by Andrew Morgan, who had previously directed Sylvester McCoy's debut, Time and the Rani. He was, however, disappointed with the outcome of that story, and wanted to rectify it, and saw the script for Remembrance of the Daleks as something he could work better with. Keeping in tone with Ivanovich's script, Morgan directs the story at a fast pace, with its editing and cuts, sometimes in the midst of the action, and often has a Dalek firing straight at the camera to use it as a transition from one cut to the next shot. He also keeps in tradition with how directors of the past have previously worked with the Daleks by primarily shooting them from low angles to make them appear more menacing and dominant on screen. Another interesting feature Morgan uses while shooting the story is the point of view of the Daleks. Rarely seen in Doctor Who, various attempts have been used in the past to give the point of view from their eye stalk, usually with the same impression that we see as humans. But Morgan opts to shoot the Daleks' viewpoint using a thermal imaging camera, giving off an inverted image in green. This may have been inspired by the sci-fi action film Predator, which was released a year before and uses the same trick. Classic Doctor Who stories are well known for being limited with special effects, due to budget constraints, but Remembrance of the Daleks to me feels it doesn't give that impression and feels the money was actually well spent. A particularly impressive shot is in the climax to episode 3, when the Imperial Dalek battle shuttle lands in the school playground. In the past, special effects teams and designers would have recreated the school with a model and created a miniature version of the ship to recreate the landing scene before cutting back to the actual school and the cast. Depending on the quality of the model work, this approach to special effects had mixed results, and as the series progressed in later years, this method created a clear jarring effect when trying to edit it in with the live action. However, between designer Martin Collins and visual effects designer Stuart Brisden, they managed to build a larger model of the shuttle and lower it into the playground with the use of a crane, making the effect look far more realistic as spaceship landings go. Incidental music for Remembrance of the Daleks was provided by Keith McCulloch, who also performed the arrangement of the Doctor Who theme tune for the 7th Doctor era. McCulloch tended to stick to a set formula for his incidental music of using upbeat synth music with a fanfare-style sound with synth bass and drums, and with Remembrance of the Daleks, it's fast-paced, keeping in line with Ben Ivanovich's writing and Andrew Morgan's directing. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of McCulloch's music, but I feel here it's actually perfectly matched to the feel of the story. On a side note, Remembrance of the Daleks was also the first Doctor Who story to have its sound recorded in Nicam stereo. Remembrance of the Daleks was broadcast in 4 episodes between the 5th to the 26th of October 1988 as the opening story to season 25. Doctor Who, since 1986, had seen a massive decline in its viewing figures, due in part to the BBC moving it into a Wednesday evening time slot opposite Coronation Street. But despite that, Remembrance of the Daleks spawned a minor resurgence in the viewing figures, with its average of 5.4 million views across the 4 episodes, being the highest viewing figures the show had had since the Daleks' last appearance 3 years earlier in Revelation of the Daleks, giving the impression that after 25 years, the inclusion of Daleks in a Doctor Who story still brought an increase in viewings. As for Remembrance of the Daleks itself, it is a story that advances the 7th Doctor era by providing it with definition and purpose, following season 24 being a series of hit and misses. The 7th Doctor is more complex and manipulative, and as such has more layers to his character, bringing back some of the mysteries of him. This is also a story with no padding, and is very easy to watch from an audience perspective, moving away from traditional plot entrapments, in particular ones that are prominent in Dalek stories. The Daleks themselves are once again released from the shadows of Davros, which they have been under since Genesis of the Daleks, and as such bring back the threat and menace they once held, whilst at the same time more layers to their backstory is added with their civil war. Beyond this, script editor Andrew Cartmel would advance his master plan with the dark nature of the Doctor consuming the character even more in the stories that followed, and bringing Ace more into the fold, making him more than a companion and at times as important to the show as the Doctor himself. Alas, the Cartmel master plan was never concluded, with Doctor Who being put on hiatus after season 26 and not coming back as a permanent feature until 2005. However, it would be continued to be addressed in the new adventure novels that stood in for the show's absence during the 1990s. With the hiatus coming in 1989, this would also be the Daleks' final appearance in the classic series, and they wouldn't appear in Doctor Who until the series returned in 2005. Had Doctor Who never come back, then Remembrance of the Daleks would have felt like a fitting end to the Doctor's biggest enemies. However, when they returned in 2005, their popularity came back too, with them having engaged in the Time War of the Time Lords, their ability to hover being a more permanent feature, and Davros's appearances were minimised to maintain their focus as an antagonist. The one factor that was ignored from the events of Remembrance of the Daleks was the destruction of Skaro, and having appeared on more than one occasion in the new series, and several explanations are given as to why it wasn't destroyed in the climax of this story. As for writer Ben Aranovich, he would go on to write season 26 opening Battlefield, and penned a story for the proposed season 27 before the show went on hiatus. He later contributed 3 novels to the new adventures in the 1990s. So, that concludes my review of Remembrance of the Daleks. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.